Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about another sensory system. It's a system of ascending axons, white matter axons that are carrying sensory information from the body. This is called the anterolateral system, and it carries specifically pain, temperature, and also itch sensation. And another form of touch, actually, too, is also carried by the anterolateral system. There are specialized receptors sort of deeper in the skin, actually, that respond to sort of slow, kind of deeper kind of touch across a series of these receptors, kind of like a massage touch. It's actually considered to be more of a sensual or massage kind of touch. What you should note is that the kinds of information that are carried by the anterolateral system have some kind of emotional slash feeling kind of consequence. They require some kind of an emotional response, or they generate or provoke some sort of an emotional response. So the anterolateral system is carrying emotionally significant information. Again, pain, temperature, itch, and some forms of deep touch. And they receive input from specialized sensory receptors, nociceptors. That's a fancy term for those pain-sensing neurons, that are out there in your body. Thermoreceptors, you should probably have a good sense, mean, sensory receptors that are responsive to changes in temperature, right? Itch-sensitive neurons respond to itch. And then there's deep sensual massage touch receptors also, whose axons who are going to actually provide input into this anterolateral, ascending white matter system. So this is a complicated system because this information, right, that's derived from these, specific kind of sensory receptors, actually goes to many different locations in your central nervous system. So there are three sort of component tracks actually that make up the anterolateral system. The spinothalamic is the one I really want to focus on because that's going to send that emotionally significant kinds of information up to areas of the cortex and to a specific region of the cortex known as the insular lobe. The spinomesencephalic tract, that's a terrible term, isn't it? Well, that's the mesencephalon. That refers to the brain stem. This is sending information up to various regions of the brainstem that can help to generate sort of important reflexive responses to this kind of emotionally significant information. For example, it can go to nuclei in the brainstem that can alter your posture, or that can change your facial expression. Actually, too, you're like, ugh, ow, or ah, all these different facial expression things. So the information that's coming from your body that's emotionally significant can generate emotional, bodily sorts of responses. Another very important, target of the spinomesencephalic, component is actually the superior colliculi, those bumps on the dorsal surface of your brainstem that can help orient your head, neck, and eyes, towards the source of whatever it is, that's generating this kind of emotionally significant input. And finally, there's the spino-reticular tract. This is another component tract, right, of the anterolateral system, and it literally means all of those modulatory neurotransmitter related nuclei. So VTA, substantia nigra, locus ceruleus, PPT, Raphe nuclei, the source of the release of dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin, and all those modulatory neurotransmitters, because emotionally significant input, like pain, for example, is going to provoke more activity in those modulatory neurotransmitter systems, and release more of those modulatory neurotransmitters and wake you up. So imagine yourself, on a long drive and you're trying to stay awake, right? So what do? You pinch yourself, right? Oh, that actually is anterolateral kind of emotionally significant input, and it's going to go one of the places it will go is the brainstem to these along the spino-reticular component, and provoke the release of more of these modulatory neurotransmitters. And get you to wake up a little bit, and really you should pull over, and get a cup of coffee, because coffee, it turns out, caffeine also acts at these nuclei in the brainstem, to provoke more release and to wake you up as well. Okay, so let's look at some of these individual components of the anterolateral system. So again, the source, right, are going to be sensory receptors for pain and for temperature. Okay, and it turns out that the source are also, there's a lot of other very detailed kinds of inputs, particularly to the spinal thalamic component, and we'll mention that in a minute. But anyway, very much like the dorsal column system, their functional dendrites are out here in the body. Their cell bodies are located in the dorsal root ganglia of the dorsal roots of the spinal nerve. And look, they make a connection here in the dorsal horn, right? This is partly because some of this information about emotionally significant input requires some sort of a reflex response, like withdrawal of the limb or something at the level of the cord. So you want some kind of a rapid response. So from here, you can have an interneuron connect to the ventral root, which then sends out a motor command for withdrawal of the limb from something that's painful or hot, for example. But then from the dorsal horn, you see this anterolateral. It says tract. It should say system because it's composed of multiple tracts, right? And it's heading up, rostrally in the cord. And look at all the different places this information can go. It can go to that reticular formation again, which is literally just the nuclei that release those modulatory neurotransmitters again, right? And it can help to wake you up for arousal, right? It goes to the superior colliculus to help orient you towards the source of this incoming information. And then the component I want to focus on is the spinal thalamic component. It goes from the dorsal horn, right, straight up to the thalamus. And from the thalamus, it projects to primary somatosensory cortex, okay? That's one of the projections of this system, okay? It actually, pain and temperature can get up here and also map, in the somatosensory strip, along with all the dorsal column information, right, that we discussed earlier. Now, however, the spinal thalamic component, the primary cortical target of this information actually is not that somatosensory strip. That's one location where some of the information goes, where it's integrated, right, with all the dorsal column sensory information. So the somatosensory cortex does have some pain and temperature information, particularly from the surface of the body. Now, another brain structure, brain lobe, cortical region, right, is the most important thing to keep in mind when you're discussing the spinal thalamic tract component of the anterolateral system. So in your gut, right, in your enteric nervous system, in your thorax, you've got receptors for pain and temperature and for mechanical stress, local metabolism, cell rupture, skin parasites, immune hormone activity, all these very detailed sensory receptors that can respond to all different aspects of your internal milieu or internal environment. This is carried by your anterolateral system. So it comes in, goes into the dorsal horn, where it synapses specifically on neurons that are located in the first layer of the dorsal horn called lamina 1. And this is the source of ascending, fibers, which we refer to as the spinothalamic tract. And, there's going to be some, stops, there's some collaterals that branch off and go to various brainstem nuclei that help to generate local responses, like reflex responses from the brainstem level. We'll talk about some of these regions, like the nucleus tractus solitarius, or the nucleus of the solitary tract, when we talk about cranial nerves. But look, goes to thalamus, right? And the primary cortical target for the spinothalamic tract, which is a component of the anterolateral system, which is carrying all that information about pain, temperature, itch, central touch, cell rupture, metabolism, skin parasites. The primary place where all of this information is mapped is actually not the postcentral gyrus, but the insular lobe, sort of deep within that lateral or sylvian fissure. That's where most of that spinal thalamic information is going and getting mapped in your cortex.